All right. Thank you for joining the WWSD Podcast. We are sponsored by Collector's Maze. You can find them at www.collectorsmaze.com for all things fandom related to comics, creators, movies, television, cosplay, and more. I'm Kyle, and as always, I'm joined here by Josh and Seamus. We have a special guest tonight, Mike Disa. Mike is a film director, screenwriter, and animator. He has worked on multiple Disney movies, including Dead Space Aftermath, Hoodwink 2, Postman Pat the Movie, Wacky Races TV series, plus many more.
Thanks for joining us tonight, Mike. It's a real pleasure and honor to have you on our show.
Thank you, guys. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm really thrilled you asked.
Awesome. Yeah. It was really cool we were able to set this up. So,
I should probably, though, clarify one quick thing. In the intro, it sounded like when you said he's worked on many Disney movies included, and then you said Dead Space.
Dead Space
Disney doesn't want to have anything to do with Dead Space. That's one of the most over-the-top, brutal, sci-fi animes ever made. We had to cut I'm serious. We had to cut gruesome death scenes out to not get an X.
Oh my god!
Overseas, so not a Disney movie.
No, I don't watch
awesome.
a lot of I don't really watch a lot of Disney movies, but then I saw you did Dante's Inferno and Dead Space, and this guy's awesome. I love both those movies.
Both of those came real close. Yeah, I'm sorry. Both of those came real close to getting X's over. They showed theatrically overseas, and they were so violent and so filled with horrible stuff. I don't know if I can curse, but we had to cut zombie fucking out of Dante's Inferno to get the R.
That's awesome. Yeah. So, to get an X rating overseas, was it really just the violence in Dead Space? 'Cause I remember it being overly violent, but I don't remember it being where it was this should have an X rating.
No, X's used to be used and are still sometimes used overseas for more than sexual content.
Okay.
When I say, there was zombie fucking, I mean, we didn't really show anything. It was just, we implied it. We were enough to go no. I mean, if you just go over the top enough, especially with overseas rating systems, you can get an X, which just means that nobody under 21 can see it, period. It can't be broadcast, all that stuff. There were instances in the 70s of, Westerns and stuff and violent movies getting X's, but it wasn't for sexual content. That just sort of evolved as the porn industry kind of, United States.
What is it? Is it NC-17? Is NC-17, is that the one here you can't be?
That's what they replaced it with. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, that's what replaced it here, which is, just another way of saying, my 13-year-old kid really wants to watch it.
Yeah. All right, Mike. Go ahead, Seamus.
Oh yeah. Do you have are those violent cuts? Did all those violent scenes make it into the U.S. versions of those films?
We only made one version.
Okay.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I mean, and it was just one of those things where it was we were just doing all this. It was an incredibly violent movie, and it was really disturbing. And one of Dante's Inferno is about going to hell and being tortured. And if you read the actual original poem, it's very
really
explicit stuff. Yeah. And then the other one was Dead Space. Was the whole idea was it was like Rashomon, except it was the survivor of this doomed expedition being tortured for information about what happened, and and it was just brutal. There's this one guy who's kept seeing visions of his dead daughter, and she convinced him to kill himself brutal. And the censors were finally just, we got to cut something.
Yeah, that's cool.
Those were they were both tag-alongs to the games, right? I remember the Dead Space one shipped with Dead Space 2. Was Dante's Inferno like that, or did it come out later?
It's a very, very interesting story about that. It's about a business model that no longer exists, and two studios that no longer exist either. So it's nice to complain about them now. The idea was to do what everybody says they want to do, and only Disney ever does it. Is to do a multi-platform IP, something that can exist not only as a video game but also as a set of comic books, a set of movies, possibly a TV show. And everybody says they want to do that. Everything is pitched like that, and then almost always some talentless control freak gets put in charge, and spends all their time putting all the resources into just one of the platforms. So in the case of those movies, the person in charge of the video games was, just did not like the idea of other people even coming up with original ideas. And every good idea we used, they were like, no, we're going to use that in the video game, in the next video game. So it just turned into one of those things where I enjoyed the process of making an R-rated film like that. playing in those worlds, but it was just incredibly territorial. And to the point where, like, we were going to get it released separately, with different things, and they bundled it with the game, which, killed our sales. But they didn't want it out there. Somehow, somebody got in their head that a video game and a DVD were going to compete with each other. And
it's corporate bureaucracy. Yeah, it's fine.
Doesn't make any sense. Yeah.
Yeah, but I was pleased that they went overseas and they released theatrically overseas, and most of their popularity came from that. But in America, it was just like a lot of things, just I don't know if it's agents or lack of understanding, creatives' lack of understanding economics or whatever, but people just tend to get really weird about, doing. I mean, Doctor Who does it better than anyone probably, and at least they did for years, where it was like, you had a Doctor Who comic book, you had the Doctor Who TV series, you had Big Finish audios, you had all these great things, and you get the feeling that none of them ever even talked to each other. They were all their own thing, and they were very cool, especially the Big Finish audios. And now you kind of get the feeling that they're being there's somebody controlling them at the top. Yeah.
That's unfortunate. Stuff like that loses some of its magic, because I would love to see Dead Space in the big theaters. I thought that would be really dope. That'd be really cool to see, because I think I saw it on Netflix or HBO or show, like one of the streaming services, and like it was really cool. And yeah, seeing that like on the big screen would just be nuts. So my wife would never go with me.
No.
There's a lot of really cool concepts that are explored in video games too that would be cool to see in film.
They have like more. They can be more liberal in a video game, whereas like in film, like you said, like it was too violent to it was too violent for an X rating, and like in video game, like it was no more violent than the video game itself. So it's such a weird concept to think from like a film aspect. It's too violent, but for a video game, it's just another day in the office.
Yeah, I mean, and so they're separate things, right? So they should be approached separately. Films, tend to be a little bit more. I mean, they tend to be more narrative stories than video games, which, are stories, but far less narrative. What I mean, because they can't be, because, you're playing it, they can't stop and tell you a story while you're running for your life. Right. And it would be nice, if you could get things like, if you could take advantage, especially now with the comic book industry in its death throes, somehow like the Marvel movies and, the comic industry, committing suicide, trying to tie itself into movies, when nobody who watches those movies is collecting those comics. That's a separate, it's an almost completely separate.
Yeah.
And so they should be treated like that. You should do your comics like comics and let comic book professionals do them instead of frustrated screenwriters. And and keep that audience happy with the familiar comics and the great IPs. But instead, no, we're going to have 27 kind of Avengers comics, all written by people who never written comics. Yeah, and you can see, like, why not just let everything be its own thing? Hire people who are good at whatever they
So even on the flip side of that, like those comic book movies, they would have been fine if they just copied stuff from the comics. They didn't have to really rewrite them to make them into movies. A lot of the source material would just been good enough. And like that's always like blew my mind. Like, who do you think you are that you need to rewrite some of these like legends and like change the story and the characters just to fit your niche? Or
yeah, I mean, it drives me nuts when it produces a bad movie, and I don't mind it when it produces like Avengers Endgame. I mean, personally, I'm so pissed that Warlock wasn't the guy who killed Thanos.
Adam Warlock, especially they introduced him in Guardians too. They did the whole build up to Adam Warlock.
And they did do everything. Actually, I don't know if you guys can see this. I don't know if can you see who's up there? That's actually Captain Marvel and Warlock statues.
Oh
there. That's awesome.
I mean, I the 70s, Jim Starlin's comics were like, closest thing I had to a friend, right? And I mean, and I loved him, and I was so disappointed when I heard Warlock and Marvel weren't going to be in the film. And then I saw the films, I was like, oh, I don't care, this is great.
Yeah, I was like that as well. Like I remember like all the fan theory stuff, like going into it, they're going to do all this, and then they didn't, and I wasn't even that mad. I was like, this is still a good movie. Like I'm still happy. I'm still smiling on my face the entire time. I still cried. I still cheered and all.
Yeah.
So yeah. It's.
But then when like the but then you get something like the DC universe.
Oh.
And you're like, why the fuck didn't you just make the comics? Oh my God. Like, what are you doing? What are you doing?
Yeah,
like, I think it has to do
I
with
haven't really
respect.
enjoyed those movies.
The DC universe stuff.
Yeah.
Neither did
like,
the financiers.
It's really hard being a DC fanboy in like the last few years. It's just like, God damn it.
Oh yeah. I mean, you know, iconic, you know, characters from our, you know, the DC characters are iconic. And to see them treated like that is just like, you're really bumming me out. And Superman shouldn't kill people and all the other stuff. But I think what we're all talking about though is the sense of like, if you can sense the filmmaker loves the source material and then changes it because they're dealing in a different medium, we're good with it. Since they disdain it, you know, I mean, if you sense the fact that like, you know, the only comic book this person's ever read is, you know, the Frank Miller Batman stuff, you know,
or the Wikipedia like clip notes like version. It's just like, how'd you miss like the entire, like all the character stuff of this person? Like you just completely butchered it.
Yeah, it's like that. I mean, you know, I think that's why a lot of people, I mean, there's lots of reasons why the last Wonder Woman film didn't do well, but I think one of them was like, you didn't get any sense of love for the history of that character. I mean, that character, the way it is in the comic books is amazing. My favorite run, obviously, being Perez's and John Byrne's. William Menser Loeb's was pretty good too. Yes, now that I've established my comic book bona fides, we can move on to talking about me.
Oh yeah, trust me, I can talk about comics all day. Kyle's actually never seen any of the Marvel MCU stuff, so we actually literally like had an hour intervention over the weekend. Where I'm just like, are you fucking serious? Like, he's like, no, I don't like action movies. That was literally his excuse, and I was like, "Come on, dude."
Oh well, I don't like action movies either, but I mean, I'd rather go see a good drama, or you know, I mean, I'm a huge fan of classic old Hollywood movies, but those aren't action movies. I don't know what
the roller coaster. It's a roller coaster. You slap in, and you just have a fucking fun time. Like you're smiling the entire time, you're crying, you're laughing. Like it's just a ride.
That's, you know what? That's what Scorsese said, right? He said these films aren't really films; they're rides, and I think he's right. They're not cinematic experiences. And if you know, what was it? Prometheus was the only film that I fell asleep in and then woke up in time to leave. You know, and I only bring that up because, like, you know, I'm not a big fan of these just spectacle. I mean, the new Star Wars films are an atrocity, and so are some of the old ones. And a lot of these films are horrible, but some films are just meant to be rides. You go with your, you know, you go with your daughter, and in the middle of a fight when all the female Avengers get together, and you know, and she starts cheering. You're like, okay, I mean, I'm glad I came. This has been a ride. This is like getting on a roller coaster with your family, you know.
And some of those movies you have to see in theaters. Like it loses a little bit of its magic by not being around a bunch of people. Like I remember when Cap picked up the hammer, the entire movie theater lit up. Lost her mind. It's like I can never recreate that. Like no matter how many times I rewatch in my living room on my 70-inch TV, like it'll never be the same as that. And
I mean, it was like it wasn't until I saw it at home that I realized that there was dialogue after that scene because people went nuts for so long.
So you know, one of my other favorite times, I was during part one when Spider-Man started fading away at the end. There's literally a girl next to me literally started bawling, crying, like just absolutely bawling, crying, and it was like, oh man, this is so like heavy for her. She doesn't realize there's a part 2 yet. Like she doesn't realize there's already another movie scheduled to come out next summer. Like obviously he's coming back, but like this girl is just absolutely losing it. It was like the most like real thing I've ever felt.
Yes, because because Spider-Man defeated his most evil enemy, Sony, and was able to come back.
They're actually it's still owned by Sony. Yeah,
it's still owned, but at least he gets to stay in the Marvel universe, which means ticket sales. Actually, a lot of us who do movies for a living now are very concerned because there's entire genres of films that only work in movie theaters.
Okay,
you ask me, these are done.
I'm sorry.
Nobody gives a crap about. I'm sorry. If you ask me, Pixar movies are done as big budget, huge things because those were family events, and you went and saw them in a theater, and it's just like Disney movies. They weren't very good. They weren't very funny. You weren't very engaged, but your kids loved it, and there were nice songs. And you know, and that's what it was. It was that. Now everything's streaming. Who cares? I mean, have you heard anybody really going nuts about the last 2 streaming animated movies? No. I mean, it's like they dropped off the cultural.
They did make a lot of money. I think it was Trolls. Like Trolls had like the record sales. They made so much money that weekend. What was the other animated movie that came out? Was it, I guess, Mulan maybe?
Yeah, but
that
you're
was
talking
live
about before the shutdown.
Before the shutdown. I got you.
So
okay.
Yeah, we're all worried about the fact that now that Warner Brothers has announced everything's going directly to HBO Max, and Disney's announced all the Pixar and Disney films are going directly to their streaming service. They're done. They're going to be made for TV movies before you know it. I mean, there's no way people are. It'll. Just the nonsense of our economy will coast for a while, but you're not going to see $200 million cartoons 5 years, 10 years from now.
Well, even like the big budget Hollywood movies, it's hard to justify that if it's just going to go on a streaming service. I mean, I can't imagine we're going to have like those crazy blockbusters anymore. I know, what was it? They're pretty pissed about the Warner Brothers deal. With those directors, like they're like, this is our lifeblood. Like we can't just have this on the streaming service. It needs to go on the big screen. Like people have to see it on the big screen.
They're like, I didn't even read the script. I mean, I can't get by on story. I'm a filmmaker in Hollywood in the 2000s, I shoot with a camera that's 18K for no reason. And then I point it, at the side of people's heads.
Well, don't you think that we could see kind of like a renaissance since they have to rely more on the content rather than like a cookie cutter, just everyone's kind of enjoying formula?
It would be nice. It would be nice if it was like, well, no, I mean, I'm empathizing with that hope. I have that conversation with a lot of my friends, and there's the cynic in me who understands the financing of films because I've made so many independent films, even though your audience doesn't know that. We're talking movies right away. Since I've made so many independent films and understand the financing, I don't know. Because what they're going to do is they're going to go down the rabbit hole chasing smaller audiences. Which means even the successful ones are going to be generating way less. Well, the streaming business model is kind of innately destructive to human culture anyways, because what it's doing is just chasing 18 to 30-year-olds. They just want people who got their first credit card and have to pick a streaming service. And so they don't care about children, about families. They don't care about adult women. They certainly don't care about men my age. All they want is somebody who's just gotten out of college and is, in debt and has a credit card and, and who's going to, sign up for a streaming service. So you see a lot of what you see on streaming services are negative pickups of stuff that's either made overseas in other countries. And then you've got those big CAA managed deals where, star number 3, gets $18 billion for making a Netflix series, and nobody signs up to watch it, but everybody got their write-up in the Hollywood Reporter, and all the agents got their bonuses, and so that's just a
patting each other on the back.
Yeah, it's just a bullshit machine that sucks money out of the air. But the other part of it is the fact that you've constantly got to be signing up more, more people than you had the quarter before. I mean, the moment Netflix, which is publicly traded, announces that they didn't sign up more people than they did the quarter before, they're going to be out of business in 6 days because traders are going to dump their stock, and the only thing keeping them in business is their stock price. So they've got to continuously, I mean, at a certain point, it's going to be like Chicago politics. I'm like, now more people are signed up for Netflix than exist in the world. I mean, they're
registering your dead grandparents.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, their business model, eventually, if everybody in the country signs up for Netflix, they'll go out of business the next day, right? Because there's nobody else to sign up. But because of that, they're niching. They have to go down and niche. They're so desperate. They're like, you know what we need? We need, and I'm not going to make something up to try to be funny because I don't want to offend any particular group, but we need this incredibly narrow slice of the audience, and we're going to go get them because our metrics show that they aren't signing up for this stuff.
Yeah.
And so a whole bunch of media gets made specifically to attract them, and then on and on and on. And it's just niching and niching and niching and niching to the point where media isn't really made for a general populace anymore. And to go back to what you originally said, was like, well, I'd love to start a renaissance. I'd like to see rom-coms come back, and, you know, classical detective movies and smart epics. You know, I mean, who wouldn't want to see the, you know, great movies like The Man Who Would Be King, you know, David Lean movies getting made again, you know, not that David Lean made that. I understand. Please hold your calls. But, you know, the great Hollywood films of the 70s. But I don't think so. You know, I think what triggered that, you know, Hollywood's golden age was, you know, what it was. And then the big renaissance in the 70s was because they broke up the monopolies and independent voices could get financed. And there was such a need for film that, you know, you could invest in a movie, it would go out on enough screens that you were pretty sure you were going to make your money back, because things weren't that expensive. And then Steven Spielberg, who's the guy who taught me, by the way, so I'm not saying anything mean. Steven Spielberg and Lucas got together and destroyed film by creating the, and they've said it, they both admitted it, you know, by creating the blockbuster. And then the blockbuster required more and more money. So then the business model turns to like, you got to have more and more screens because you got to make more and more money back. And it drove out all the competition, and they started chasing the audience, the young audience, because they were the ones that, you know, they could get with that, you know, with the blockbusters. I mean, you know, Robert Redford had to take a job in a Marvel movie, you know, because they weren't making, you know, Robert Redford movies, you know, good movies like that anymore. Yeah. The Park and stuff like that, and all the rom-coms, they all disappeared. So even before the streamers came in and put the final nail in a lot of these coffins, you know, the blockbuster approach to Hollywood, which is very narrow. They were trying to get young men between the ages of 18 and 35 to go to the movies constantly, giving them events and things they couldn't miss and stuff like that. And, you know, that all through the 80s and the 90s, you saw that happening. And that drove a lot of other kinds of creative voices out of the business or to TV, which is why TV started, I think, having a renaissance. Is, you know, instead of making a great, you know, instead of making a great indie film, they made Breaking Bad, you know. But that really narrowed everything, and it's a problem. And with TV now doing the same thing, narrowing its focus, picking the bones of its audience, you might say. I don't know. I would love a renaissance. You know, I hate the fact that I can't write and produce and sell the kinds of movies I necessarily am interested in. I've got to, you know, go chase the ones that they're willing to make.
So you seem to, do you have a sense of like a type of business model or that would like facilitate and cultivate more artistic expression and like more of what the kinds of things that artists like yourself want to make?
Yeah. And by the way, nothing grabs podcast listeners like talking about business models, but we'll go there. It's the premiere episode. Let's talk business. No, but it's actually an insightful question, because there's really only two that I can think of. One is what you have in other countries, which is the government regulates entertainment to a point. I mean, they support it. The Canadian Film Board is one of the reasons why, you know, Canada made the best animated shorts in the world for 30 years. They made wonderfully sensitive movies about disenfranchised groups of people because the government said, you know, this is media. It's using the public airwaves. It has to have some sort of content. And we're not going to judge it as good or bad, but it has to be varied. You know, it wasn't, the cowardly capitalists all chasing the same buck, right? So France, Germany, Korea, and to some extent Japan, the reason that Japanese anime is so amazingly diverse, I mean, its content is as varied as human experience, and there's ways to get the government to help you pay for it. That would be one way. The other way would be what we had, which would be for Disney and Warner's and Netflix, which are clearly monopolies, to be forced to break up, so that they're not, so you don't have the distributors and being the same people as the producers, being the same people as the financiers, and every big talent agent in the agency in the country should be made illegal. Not just because they're awful people who do terrible things to actors, but also because these packages they come up with are what everybody's chasing. Yeah. So like it's the unfettered, big business friendly monopoly system we have now does not lend itself to creative expression or variety, for that matter. It's the same reason why there's a shitload of McDonald's.
Yeah.
Everywhere it's the same basic concept.
That's interesting how that because there's like this kind of interplay between like profit searching and and art, and like the capital being there allows the art to be made, but at some point that those incentives like overtake the creative process, and then it's not really adding anything anymore, right?
I mean, yeah, I think people have a romanticized vision of how this works. Frankly, if you're an artist and you don't have a good idea of how the business model works, you're going to live and die in obscurity, not making what you want to make. You've got to feed the beast if you want it to be distributed nationally, otherwise you can put on, local community theater and do great work. But if you want HBO Max to show your stuff, no, wait a minute, nobody does that. But if you wanted somebody else to show your stuff, you got to know what their business model is, and you got to hit the target. And then once it's there, once you've got the box you're working in, then the trick of being an artist is to work within that artistically. And you can see that difference between, look at the Mandalorian and the 3 Star Wars movies. Both are in the same box. One of them has an artist working on it. The other one had a committee of people with an agenda.
Right. Yeah.
So you actually brought up a point where like those monopolies, I actually think like Disney like buying up like the Marvel franchise, the Star Wars franchise, the Fox franchise is actually like good in some sense, because like we're getting those movies. Because if Disney didn't buy Marvel, we wouldn't have the MCU. We wouldn't have, I mean, granted, the last 3 Star Wars movies are really trash, but there was some really good Star Wars movies. Rogue One was good. The Mandalorian, like you said, was good. There's some other good stuff in the pipeline. So, I mean, like those monopolies do help out in a sense to get like those franchises moving again. I mean, I understand, like, how do you feel about those?
I'm of two minds, because, I'm a dork, so I agree with that. I want Marvel to keep making movies. I would also like Marvel to keep publishing comics. It doesn't look like that's going to be happening much longer. I want to see Superman movies because, I'm a lonely little nerd boy and I like those. But the problem with that is that you'll never see anything but that. I hope you like that. I hope you like the McDonald's hamburger you're eating, because you'll never, ever, ever get a homemade one or a surprise little one popping up, because these big monopolies then that control all media can shut down anything that can. I'll give you an example. Myself and Chris Judge from Stargate, the Stargate franchise. He's my best friend. He and I developed a sci-fi project, and it's called Sentinels, and you can listen to the dramatized podcast at Sentinels Point of No Return on Spotify or anywhere you wish to go. And we want to develop as either anime or live action. And the problem we're running into is the fact that there's only 5 or 6 places to actually, with the money to actually show these things. But Disney doesn't want new sci-fi. They've got their Marvel stuff and they've got Star Wars. As a matter of fact, actively don't want anybody developing anything else. Warner Brothers has the DC stuff and Babylon 5, even though sometimes it looks like they don't really realize they've got Babylon 5. They don't want, if you want to see stuff like Babylon 5 and Farscape and all this stuff to continue, if you want to leave an opening for new creators with new ideas, not just constant reboots of the same old shit, you've got to have avenues for them to be able to produce it. And these big companies aren't finding IPs and them, any IPs, and then they're gobbling up all the distribution methods. Distributors have been pretty much run out of business in years. I mean, like I used to know, I don't know, maybe half 100 distributors by name. You know, now all but 3 of them are out of business. It's
that's crazy.
You know, if you want, I always say this to people. I'm like, look, oh God, I'm spacing on the name of it. The found footage film, the Blair Witch Project. If you want the Blair Witch project, which started an entire genre of found footage, awesome films, then you need independent distributors so that if you make a found, you know, the Blair Witch Project, you know, it has a way of getting out to people. Well, you know, if Disney's only interested in the Conjuring series because they've bought it, now Touchstone and ABC and God knows how many other channels that they own, and the same thing with, you know, Paramount and Viacom and stuff. They're not going to show it because it competes with an IP that they have. And they borrowed money from Goldman Sachs to buy those IPs. So those IPs have to stay valued because, you know, they're actually bought them on, you know, they're in debt for buying them. So the moment that those IPs aren't valuable anymore, then the fake value of them drops off the books, and then Goldman Sachs either wants their money back or, you know, does other evil things. They, you know, like, you know, Biden robot and get it elected president, which they did.
So, I mean, if I would have told myself 20 years ago that you would have a new Marvel movie, a new Star Wars movie every year for the rest of your life, I think I would have been super psyched about it. But now you're like really bringing me down about it.
Yeah. This effect on everyone.
Yeah. Because it's like interesting because like you don't see any like the other movies anymore. Like I haven't seen like a non-DC or non-Marvel movie in a while. Like I think Hellboy might have been the last one of those that I've seen. But like
they're not getting made.
They're
not getting made. All you're going to get is reboots of the IPs that they own.
They're just recycling everything at this point.
Yeah, that sucks.
Very depressing.
There used to be a cartoon they used to show us at Disney. You know, Glenn Keane used to show it of. You know, it's like, here's all these other people making, you know, all these kids making these sandcastles, and their sandcastles are shit. And here's a Disney artist, and look how great his sandcastle is. It's all fancy and all that shit. And I was like, that's everything wrong with humanity, Glenn. It's like the fact that these other kids are making sandcastles and doing their independent sandcastles, just because you spent more money on your sandcastle doesn't make it better.
Yeah, fuck those kids' sandcastles.
Yeah, I mean, it was literally that. It's like, screw creativity. You know, look, it's fancy. You know, I was like, oh, great. And no wonder Disney, you know, Disney 2D media, you know, crashed and burned under your watch.
All right. I mean, we've kind of diverted a little bit, but this has been really good stuff so far.
That's very interesting.
Do you want to give
just like slap Disney and Glenn King? Silence. All right, we'll change the subject.
Fortunately, they're not our sponsors as of yet, so you can say whatever you want about either. But let's
you know what sucks? Collecting things sucks. Sorry.
So for our listeners that are joining in, we have Mike Disa here. He's been an animator, writer, director. You start your career early 90s, I believe, or is that when you start your film career?
Yeah, no, that's early 90s. I'm from the south side of Chicago originally, and so I came out here in my grandpa's old Delta 88 with a portfolio in the trunk and a dream, and I was homeless for God knows how long, and trying to break into the movie industry, and that was in the early 90s. Yeah.
So what made you actually want to go into like the movie industry? I think your background was in computer, was it computer science or computer something?
No, it was my degree.
Okay.
My background is I was born and raised in the south side of Chicago, 64th Street, not too far from Marquette Park, which, if you know anyone who's from Chicago knows, that's the murder capital of the world. Well, not counting Beirut, places of war. Okay, that's the murder capital of America. I apologize to everybody being bombed by drones by us at the moment. I understand you had it worse.
They're all angry, writing angry YouTube comments like...
Yeah, they're like, no, wait a minute, my country is... never mind, we got him. So I was born in a really, really, really crappy part of Chicago, and a working class parents teaching. And my dad was an artist. He taught art in the Chicago school system back when they used to teach art in schools. And he instilled in me a wonderful, passionate love of drawing in early American cartoons, especially newspaper cartoons. Then also at that time, there were only 4 or 5 channels. Kids, there was a time when you only had 4 or 5 channels on the TV, and you had a little dial with only 11 numbers on it, and half the numbers didn't work.
Kids don't even know what channels are anymore. It's all streaming services.
Yeah, I know.
You click the show and you just binge it till you pass out.
I know. But on Sundays in Chicago on WGN, they would just play classic old movies all day. You start with cartoons. You know, Ray Rayner would start you off during the weekdays, but Ray Rayner would start you off with cartoons, and there'd be a little break in the day when you'd switch over to PBS to watch Doctor Who and Red Dwarf, and then you'd click back, and you get family classics. Fraser Thomas would play nothing. To go back to what you were talking about earlier, Renaissance and the great old films, would play nothing but great, cheap public domain films from the 30s, 40s, and 50s. And then in the evening, they'd play great movies from, the ABC Sunday night movie or whatever it was. And, these were things, like Suspense, Suspicion, these fantastic Masquerade. You can go through all the fantastic movies. The Men Who Would Be King, Bridge of the River Kwai. And for some reason, my dad and I bonded over watching those movies. And they were a tremendous escape from the violence of my daily life because every other day of the week I was, fighting for my life or, committing horrible crimes as part of a gang of kids, just trying to survive on the south side of Chicago. And, so I grew up in this world of basically misery and drunkenness and hatred and, and violence and movies. And it was like, well, what do you want to do? Well, given that choice, I mean, it was either like, I was either going to join the army, join the police, become a fireman, become a priest, or I was going to run. And so I ran to Hollywood. And I had a degree in computer science I also had a degree in drawing, but in art from NIU, local, back when you could do things like get a football scholarship and work a job and give yourself a college degree, which is no longer an option for anybody. But, I worked my way through college and I got myself these things and got in a car and came out to Hollywood to, be an animator only because, my dad and I really liked Warner Brothers cartoons. So I thought, okay, I'll go do that. I had no idea how to be able to, how to do anything else, and nobody in Chicago knows nothing. If it ain't making a really good sausage, we don't know shit about it. So I came out here and couldn't find work because my work wasn't good enough. I didn't understand what I needed to do, which is why I teach so much. Why I teach online, I teach with Stage 32, and I teach so much to kids is because unless you grow up in the entertainment industry, you probably have no idea how to make a living at it or how to get yourself trained to be good at it. And it's a lot easier now with the internet than it was when I was growing up. But I came out here and I couldn't find a job because I wasn't good enough. And so I was homeless and, had to get myself trained. And luckily, I'd spent all those years committing crimes, so I was good at living in Venice Beach. But you can ask about details about any of this, I'll tell you, but it'll horrify you. And
what was the worst thing you ever did for some pen and paper?
I used to sell caricatures on the beach, so but I used to griff a lot. It was all con stuff.
Yeah,
you have to pay off the gangs who down there to be allowed to live, to be allowed to griff on the beach.
I mean, but you're from Chicago, so like those gangs have to be pretty loose. Like I can't imagine those gangs.
Every gang member I've ever met is a lot tougher than me. Yeah. I mean, I don't know how serious Chicago gangs feel about LA gangs, but they scared the living crap out of me, and they put me in the hospital a bunch of times too. So, but I used to do caricatures, and then we would do cons. I would, I hooked up with the girl who did the fortune telling, and I was the guy who walked by, and she said, "Sir, I'll take your fortune." I'm like, who, me? And it was that one of my favorites was because I could pass. Because I wasn't involved in drugs or the other scene or the scenes that made you look like, skeeve. I could pass as a waiter and stuff. So often I just put on a white shirt and I'd wait till I saw waiters leave the outdoor cafes. And I would walk up to the people and I'd walk in and I'd put a towel over my arm. And I'd talk to the people and say, "How did you enjoy your meals? Everything great? Great. I'll take your check." And they'd hand me all their credit cards and stuff like that. I would just walk out the front door.
Damn, man.
And then I'm really glad that animation stuff worked out then for you.
Yeah, because like I feel so much better about myself working in the animation industry than I did stealing from people.
Oh yeah. So you mentioned you had to kind of figure it out on your own how to get good enough to get hired. Was there any anybody that helped you along the way at that first point, or did you just figure that out on your own?
Awesome question. Yeah, everybody who wants to get good at something, especially an artist, because there's always mentorship. But everybody who wants to get good at something has to have a teacher. What happened is that I finally got a job doing cleanup for $1.50 a frame, for this, for this studio that was making these interactive discs. Technology no longer exists. And these drawings were so bad that doing cleanups took all day, So on a good day, I made enough money for gas to get back to Azusa, where I was living next to a crack house. On a bad day, I slept in the car in the alley. But that was around other artists finally, and that's the thing. It's community. If you want to be good at something, you have to find people who are doing it, and you have to join the community, and communities are always there to help you. There's always somebody who's gone through it. And I started asking them, and it turns out a lot of them had been educated by Glenn Villepeu, who is still alive and still teaching. And he is the greatest mannerist artist of this generation, and possibly the last, since Sargent. He's brilliant. And I went and found him, and he was teaching classes at the zoo. And I showed him my portfolio, and he told me I was helpless and there was no point in him taking my money because he couldn't teach me. So I stalked him until he took mercy on me and started teaching me. I'm not even kidding a little. I used to follow him around the zoo. And
that's cool. You earned it. Yeah.
And then
earned a restraining order.
No, I mean, seriously, if you're willing to take no for an answer, then you're willing to fail, right? So, and that started a lifelong journey of learning, and it's never stopped. I still take classes at workshops. I learn it. I student as much as I teach. And that's just how I was able to, everything, all that stuff on my resume, all the different movies I've done, all the TV shows I've done, the Disney, getting into Disney, working with Steven Spielberg, working with Ralph, then, moving on, doing all my independent films, then coming back and, creating TV shows. Every one of them is a constant state of learning, and you have to be learning. You have to be teaching yourself how to write. You have to be reading scripts. You always have to be learning. If not, then you're just a one-trick pony. You're somebody with a trick. You're somebody with a cute little skill. Mm-hmm. And I've seen a lot of animators who, especially from Disney and stuff, who I came up with, who, they still just do that one thing. Hmm. And sometimes they make a living at it, sometimes you don't. That's just luck. But if you want to be an artist, you have to learn constantly. You have to constantly putting yourself in positions where you're both uncomfortable and crappy at stuff, which is hard to do. It's hard. The older you get, the harder it is to say, I'm going to do something that I don't know how to do, and I'm going to do it badly for a few years. And it's embarrassing. And you just got to get over it. And you're like, I'm an artist. I'm an artist, and I'm learning.
When did you feel like you got your first real break? Like, was it finally working with Disney, or I know you did some Warner Brothers stuff prior to that, I believe. When did you feel like you?
Disney actually turned out to be a really bad idea for me. I mean, I'm grateful for Eric Goldberg, the guy who animated The Genie, is the guy who trained me as my mentor, and I'm incredibly grateful to him and incredibly lucky to have met him. And Dale Bear, who recently passed away, was another one of my mentors, a brilliant, famous animator. And I was honored beyond belief to get to work and study with these animators. But I'm an indie film guy at heart. I don't want to make Happy Meals, no matter how beautiful they are. And hey, and that's no disrespect. You got to build a McDonald's before you can make a Happy Meal. No mom and pop, they're not bad. They're exactly what they're intended to be. but I didn't want to make the same film over and over, for 30 years, slightly less well every time. And that's, kind of the model. My break, my first break to get into film was Ralph Bakshi hired me. Oh God, I don't know if I should tell this or not. They hired me because I had been a bouncer.
Okay.
Because sometimes we're a little bit too much to drink. Guys in the studio could handle them. But I got along with him great. Actually, he's the reason I came out here. When I was a freshman in college at NIU, this stunningly beautiful girl I was in a class with came up to me, and just the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen in my life. She came up to me and she said, they're showing a movie here. It's called like something like Dead Bunnies or something. Would you want to come to the movie with me at the student union? And I was like, yeah. And so I went to see this with her, and the Dead Bunnies thing was fine, but then the movie they showed after it was Wizards, Ralph Bakshi's Wizards, the second greatest animated film ever made in human history, and it transported me. And from that point on, I was like, oh, I'm going to go be an animator. I can't remember the girl's name. I lost my virginity to her like 2 weeks later, and I still can't remember her name. But I can go through every frame of that film and draw it for her.
So I don't know if the sex was really bad or the movie was really good.
Well, if I was there, the odds are pretty good it wasn't working. But that's just a general thing. No, it's just like that's the impact it had on me. Like most people remember, the first girl, the first part of their life. I remember that movie. Shows you my priorities are. And so I got to work with Ralph, and that was a big thing. But after Ralph, things were bad for a while, and then I finally talked myself into. Well, I don't know. You guys have enough time for a story about how I got hired by Steven Spielberg?
Absolutely, yeah.
We're here for
I've
you.
been doing a bunch of stuff. Worked with Avi Arad, worked on the Maximum Carnage video games, did all these things, bouncing around Hollywood like a gypsy, like we all do. And I finally talked myself into an interview with an animator whose name I have never forgotten until this moment. There must be a reason for that. This must be God keeping me from a lawsuit. Anyways, there was Amblin was making a movie, Casper, and they had just finished Balto, and they were making Casper. And I got a hold of this animator who was the guy in charge of the animation on it, and I basically begged and talked myself into him meeting with me, even though he told me over and over again there was no work. And I was like, please just meet with me. And I had actually mentioned Glenn Vilppo, and he knew Glenn Vilppo, which goes to show you how you should be part of a community and study. So he agreed to meet with me, and so I went to the Universal Studios back before the fire, back when it was something, and I got there early in the morning. They walked me through the gate, and I got to walk by all the people in the outfits and the tours and all the stuff being filmed in the back lot, like it just isn't anymore. And they took me to the old Hitchcock compound, which was the new Amblin compound. And, it had koi ponds and stuff. It was amazing. And I walked through the offices, and it's like sitting in the office is like the spaceship model from E.T. right next to like the Raiders of the Lost Ark whip. It's all that stuff. And I got to sit down, and I walked I waited for a while. I waited for like 7 hours. They just weren't going to meet with me, but finally I waited. And I got pulled in a room, and the animator was there. And I recognized him. His name was Phil Nibbling. Sorry, Phil. Sorry, man. Phil Nibbling. And I could recognize him because I'd seen pictures of him, and he was a clean-shaved guy who always wore a silk scarf everywhere he went. I never had the courage to ask why. And he was sitting there surrounded by a bunch of guys, all who had, dark black beards, long hair, and baseball caps that all said USC on them or something else that elitist. And I was like, okay, fine. And I, and walking says, look, Mike, I only have a few minutes. I'm like, okay, I stuck my portfolio. And I'm showing him my portfolio, and I'm talking to him. And it's that moment, it's that thing you do when you are desperate. You are just like, you focus, you tunnel vision. You know, it's like things slow down like they do. Like, I'm going to make like me. So I'm showing him my portfolio. And, you know, I've got it out in front of him. I got it open. I'm saying, okay, this is my this, and this is my left drawing here, and then this is this project, and this is a project I did over here. And he's looking, he's going, okay, this is great, Mike, but we don't have any work. I'm like, I know, but I just want to show it to you because someday you're going to hire me, and you're not going to regret it because I'm going to work hard for you, and I'm here to learn, and I love movies, and I'm doing my bit, and I'm showing him all the stuff. And this guy next to him in a hat with a beard keeps grabbing the portfolio and pulling it over and looking at it and flipping pages. And I'm like trying not to lose my shit every time he does it, right? And so like, he'll do it, and I'll be like, and I'm still talking to Phil, Phil. I'm like, I'm sorry, can I grab that back? I'm sorry, I'm just thank you. I got it. Then put it, I flip back to the page I'm talking about. I'm like, okay, this is a drawing of this, and then the guy grabs it again. He starts flipping. I'm like, let me just grab. I'm sorry, just 2 seconds. You take it back and you show it to Phil. And I do this, and like the third time he grabs it, finally I'm like, I'm sorry. Are you an animator? He's like, no. I'm like, then give me that. Put it in front of Phil. And he starts smirking. Everybody else starts smirking. I don't want it. I don't care. You see where this is going to go, right? And, and I get through Phil, and Phil's smiling. He's like, okay, look, like, that's great. We might here. Take your portfolio and go outside for a minute and just give us a second. So I go outside. I'm waiting there. And then I get called back in. He's like, okay, Mike, we're going to give you a test. I'm like, great. You know, I'm not even looking at anybody else, right? I'm like, I'm going to give you a test, but there's no jobs. I'm like, that's great. I'll have for you tomorrow morning. He's like, no, the test takes a week. Go home, do the test, and I'm telling you, don't get your hopes up. There's no work. I'm like, great, I'll have it for you tomorrow morning. Like 6 a.m. the next day, I'm back with this thing done. Same clothes, you know, I haven't showered. I'm sitting there. He walks by. He's like, are you kidding? I'm like, no, here it is. And I give it to him. He's like, all right, go home. But I'm telling you, you'll never hear from us again. You know, there's no work here. The movie's full. I'm like, great. Later that day, I go home. I get a call saying, okay, Mike, you're hired. and from a secretary or something. And I said, oh, really? She's like, yeah. I'm like, oh, thank God. She said, but we want to make sure the pay's okay. Is this pay okay? It was like 8 times more money than I ever made. And I was like, yeah, that's fine. He's like, do you want us to talk it over with your agent? No, I don't think there's any need to get him involved because he doesn't exist. You know.
That's why you change your voice.
And I
You're like, hi, I'm Mike's agent.
Yeah. Hi, this is Mike's agent. I'm here to agent you. No, but and so what happens is that I show up the next morning and I get there before it opens. Turns out people don't come to work in Hollywood at 6 a.m. Who knew? And I get in there and I finally sit up with the guys, and all the guys are smiling. They're very nice, and they're going to help. I'm going to do layouts and storyboards and help with the animation. Work with ILM, you know, remotely. So it's just fantastic, and it's this huge thing. Hey, Mike, I'm like, okay, great. So we're gonna have a meeting. I'm like, okay. He's like, so come on, let's go have the meeting. I'm like, great. So everybody like from my department like lines up, and they take me through the door, and Phil takes me through the door, and they take me across, and we go past the ET spaceship and the Raiders of the Lost Ark and the ET glowing finger. And we walk into this beautiful conference room with mahogany stuff and, you know, panels all over the place and, you know, it's just stunning. And I go, I want to go sit way in the back in a chair way by the window. They're like, no, I'm like, come here. And they put me in a chair right by the door and they all line up. And then a whole bunch of other people start following us as we're walking to the, and I don't know who they are. I just think, whoa, what a friendly place. I'm like, introducing myself and shaking hands with people, and they're like, yeah, we know who you are. And oh, great, what a friendly place. And they go sit me down at the table. And I'm sitting there, and then in start walking a whole bunch of people, and they introduce themselves and shake my hand. And I'm like, oh, hi. I'm like, my God, these are nice people. What I was too dumb to realize was that everybody who was introducing myself to me had like won an Academy Award for something, and I should have known who they were. You know, like, you know, I didn't know they were.
Hi, finally, Ford.
Yeah, no, it was about like that. It was like I actually used to stalk John Williams in the koi pond after I did this because I thought he was the gardener because he'd walk around quietly all day, and I would show up and I would offer him half my lunch all the time. And he would eat it. And then finally somebody was like, what are you doing out there bothering John? We're supposed to leave John alone. Like, I thought he was the gardener. I was giving him half my bologna sandwich every day. If he would eat it, he'd go back to, you know, he was a really nice guy. Anyways, but so like people walk back to the conference room and they're walking in, and finally a guy walks in And he looks like everybody else. Everybody's got a beard. Everybody's got long hair. Everybody's wearing a baseball hat. Fucking everybody. The kid who walked around with the bagel tray looked exactly like everybody else, okay? And he says, hi, I'm Steven Spielberg. I'm like, oh, hi, I'm Mike Disa. He's like, I know. I'm like, oh. We've met. Have we? Yes. I was like, oh, well, that's nice. It's really glad to meet you. Thank you for hiring me. I was so dumb. The joke of hiring me didn't even land on me. What had happened was I'd wrenched my portfolio out of Steven Spielberg's hand without recognizing him. And Steven Spielberg was such a nice guy. He made me a job. I mean, just a genuinely nice guy. But they clearly thought this would be really funny to see my reaction, and it wasn't, because I was that stupid.
It was like really sad. Like, is this guy for real? Like,
no, they were like, no. And then you know what happened? Steven did. Steven invited me to like all of his daily sessions. He had me sit next to him. He taught me how to storyboard. The nicest fucking guy in the world. I mean, he just clearly saw how desperate and passionate I was, and he made me a job and everything. And he was incredible. And that was my big break, because what he did was watching him on sets and watching him in dailies. Watching him in dailies is an indescribable experience. If you're not someone who spends a lot of time in dailies, you won't understand the story, so I won't bore you with it. But watching him in dailies is like, you know, watching a great dancer dance. You know, it's impossible to describe. And he was incredibly nice, and he got my head in the right place. The problem is that then I left Amblin and went to when DreamWorks started, when Jeffrey Katzenberg showed up. It lasted about a week and a half with Jeffrey. That was talk about somebody who does this for the wrong reasons. And I went to Disney thinking that, you know, okay, Disney's going to be, you know, like working at Amblin, and it was nothing like it. It was, you know, making Happy Meals. And he kind of Steven ruined me for bad film making.
That should be a bumper sticker.
Yeah, Steven Spielberg
ruined me.
Yeah, Steven Spielberg ruined, you know, bad movies for me. So like, but he's the guy who put, you know, after I got done with him, I was like, well, I want to become a director. So I met Eric Goldberg and I was like, I want to be an animator. And I met Steven Spielberg and said, I want to be a director. And that launched everything. I mean, you know.
Who made you want to be a writer? You also write some of your own stuff.
Making movies with horrible scripts.
I can do this better than these assholes.
Yeah, pretty much. Like for instance, so one of the guys I worked with was Harvey Weinstein. He hired me to make a movie for him, and you know, people say a lot of things about him, but you know, I don't know. I mean, I once went to a story meeting where he showed up. He walked out of the shower naked and made me sit next to him while we went over story notes. But I didn't see anything wrong with that. He seemed like a perfectly nice guy. No, he was a sociopathic monster. Okay, those for the part of America that no longer understands satire and sarcasm, which is most of now, I'm afraid. No, I did not like working for Harvey Weinstein, and yes, I saw his winky. But he would like he had this script that was so bad. And he had me making my first movie with him. My second movie. My first movie was El Super Beasto with Rob Zombie, which was actually good.
Oh,
but which is another R-rated film. I love making R-rated animation. But I was making this film with Harvey, and it was literally the worst script I'd ever read. I mean, it was like hard to get through it. It was so bad. And it wasn't like until about 3/4 through the movie, taking his notes and all this stuff, till I realized he hadn't read it.
Oh my gosh.
So he would call me in for these story meetings to show me his winky, but he hadn't actually read it. So anyways, the movies, yeah, the script was so bad, and no matter how hard I acted it, you can't. You know, I'm sorry. I mean, directing is an important job, but without a good story to tell, you know, there's just nothing you can do. So I started working on, you know, I started rewriting scripts just as a matter of like doing it uncredited for years, and then finally writing them myself. And you know, it helped because my wife is a writer. She teaches creative writing, and she's a literary writer, published author. She wouldn't write a screenplay with my dick if I told her to, because she hates it. Was filthy. I'm sorry. You have me talking about winkies.
No,
but, you know, seriously.
Definitely.
Does she ever
not
like
good
read
for
one of your
work or
scripts and
anything.
just start like laughing at you? Like, are you serious? Like, you misspelled this
No,
word?
she would
or-
actually read them and correct them and explain things to me in a very quiet, slow voice.
very condescending about it. Just
Like, your mommy isn't going to read this. It's going to be real people. Maybe you should put effort into it. Things like that. But the kind of reader every writer should have, because it saves you a lot of shame.
yeah.
Anyways, and so I started writing, and as I got into development, at Disney Toons, and Warner Brothers, as I started being more involved in the beginning process, not just being a hired hand, you start to develop theories of storytelling. The 7 kinds of story structures there really are out there. You realize that the hero's journey is absolutely full of shit and no way to make a movie, and so on and so forth and so forth. And you start to. I mean, that was my problem with Disney. I was like, I was at Disney, essentially making the same movie over and over again, and they weren't very good. I mean, I'm sorry, those are supposed to be comedies, right? Have you ever in your life laughed at a Disney movie outside of Aladdin? Ever?
I don't really call too many Disney movies. Yeah, I think the only one I've only seen a couple of the ones you worked on as well. Like, I was too old for them at the time. So
yeah, well, I worked on like 11 or 12. I mean, and Lilo and Stitch was a pretty good one. I'll give you that one. And that was about it. And I'm not complaining about like the Disney studio or things like that. What I'm saying is that, without a good story underneath, once Howard Ashman died, he was the guy giving them the stories.
Okay.
Through his musical score.
Mm-hmm.
And from that point, storyboard artists can, dig in and improve things, and directors can pace it and make it all work. But it really does start with a story. And that's how I got into writing. I didn't want to, but eventually these days I write like scripts for Hallmark and stuff. I know it's, because romantic comedy, right? You think me, but, I write family films like Dolphin Island, the live action film I recently did, and a couple other live action projects. And I ghostwrite for horror films. And I kind of just got sucked into it because the experience of being an animation film director and not having good scripts to work from is just it's one thing when you work at Disney, when that machine is just going to churn out what it's going to churn out, and then anoint it as brilliant, and then you get to work at Disney more, even though no one else will ever hire you, right? Working on independent films, in other countries, or in animation, it takes 3 or 4 years of your life to make one of these things. And if at the end of the day you feel like, God, I look at all that effort and nobody cares because that story isn't good, and that stupid joke still isn't funny. It wasn't funny the day I read it. It's not funny now.
It wasn't funny 10 years ago and hasn't aged any better.
Yeah.
How was the work culture at Disney? Were you like the only one who's kind of dissenting and everyone else has drank the Kool-Aid, so to speak?
No, I drank the Kool-Aid too at first, but the Kool-Aid wears off if you read books.
I mean, were you just like, oh my God, I'm at Disney, this is the coolest thing ever, kind of like Kool-Aid? Or
well, no, you know what I made the mistake of doing? Like, most people in animation are here because of personal identity issues or father issues. Unless you just have a passion for drawing, like and a built-in talent for it, like Eric Goldberg, Dale Bear, these guys could draw. For them, being in animation would be ridiculous. They were clearly born to do it. But to be straight with you about how animation works is, except for being an animator, even being artist, it doesn't count. But except for being an animator, almost every other, including being a storyboard artist, including being a writer and a producer, all that stuff, those jobs are done in live action at, roughly 10 times the pay. Okay. So if you've decided to do basically the same job for 1/10 of the money, there's got to be a reason. And usually it's because you suck. The other reason is you have either like personal identity issues that make you want to join large, powerful organizations so you can feel powerful and enabled. And the other one is you have daddy issues. And I'd say about 85% of them come down to daddy issues, because animation is something that imprints on you when you're a child, when you're very vulnerable. And if you want to work in that world, if you want to stay in this childish world, it's usually because of daddy issues, right? Like I said, I mean, why do producers produce animation when you can produce live action and actually get residuals? There's no such thing as residuals in animation. None of the people who worked on Lion King got a penny for it, other than just, when they drew it. Nobody gets residuals in animation except, voice actors, because they have real agents. Not directors, writers, nobody.
That's so odd. Yeah.
It's a slum. And so either you do it because it's your passion, and I draw. It's my passion. I couldn't go too long without animating. It's something I can't work out of my system. The idea of bringing drawings to life, it's great, but they don't do that anymore. Now it's computers. It's basically puppetry. The reason I'm saying this is that you asked me a question about the culture at Disney. Well, the culture of Disney is basically a lot of people were in an atmosphere with their own personal issues. It's not about making the best movie, being a professional, being a filmmaker. It's like, we're at Disney and now Dad loves me, that kind of thing, and that was a little bit me in the beginning, because my dad, I said, was an artist, and he was, trapped in Chicago, and he was an art teacher, and me getting into Disney meant up to him. And for a couple of years, that was great. And then it wore off because at the end of the day, I was watching the movies, and I was still watching classic old films, like we were talking about. And I was watching the new films, looking at them the way Steven had taught me to, and at some point you have to admit that these are not good. How many times is Little Nemo going to fake die in one film? They're spectacle. They're spectacle. That's why I think, not being on big theaters is going to hurt them. It became about, it was about almost everything except making a good film. And that's not me being negative. The culture at Disney is basically the executives treat all the artists and all the, all but the top producers and all the PAs and everybody like idiot children. And they're kind of right to do it. Except for the artists who are drawn to do it. And, those of us who are drawn to do it, I mean, we don't drawn to do it. I just got that. But those of us who are drawn to do it, we don't care about anything else. We have to do this. We have to draw. Everybody else is just, why are you there? I'll give you another story. Sorry, it's called The Big Bouncy Clown House Story. So we had just finished another one of these films, and you get invited to the premiere party, and it's like prom for nerds, and I got a picture next to a guy in a big, cartoon head. All right, that's fantastic. You're not getting residuals, but that's okay. Be happy about this. You schmuck.
Your name's in the credits.
Yeah. We'll have to sit through an hour and a half of tiny little credits to see your name, and you're not going to make any money off this. But okay,
you should just be honored. Yeah.
But and they throw these parties like high school proms, and these kids eat it up because of all these infantile daddy issues. But so one time they were doing this thing where it's like, okay, we're going to have a thank you dinner for the execs, third floor. And then we're going to have thank you for the animators, the artists, the storyboard artists, and everything. So, oh, great. So the day they were doing the thank you artists for the producers and the execs upstairs, I went up there, and there were tables on the third floor laid out with fine crystal, beautiful, and beautiful catering. And there were wrapped, beautiful, elegant presents at every time. And you're like, oh my God, they really spent some money on this, and it's clearly really, classic. And I'm like, oh, wow, if they do this for the executives who don't have anything to fucking do with the movies, and they don't, imagine what they're going to do for us. This is great. So the next day I show up for work, and I'm all thrilled because we're going to have this big dinner, and it's happening at lunch, and they have us report to the back outside the barbecue area. And we walk out there, and, Don Hahn, who's the only guy I ever met who actually used to get his jeans dry cleaned so they had creases in them. But he's one of the people, right? He wore jeans. And we walked out, and they set up the back of Disney with big inflatable clown houses that you can bounce up and down in, and a cotton candy machine, and a clown who was making balloons, and a hot dog machine, like you would for your 5-year-old's fucking birthday.
Jesus.
And I walk out thinking, oh my God, we're all going to go nuts. This is great. You do that for them, and is this how you see us? And then outrun the animators all in their short pants and their Green Lantern shirts, and they look at it and they squeal and jump in the big bouncy clown house. And I looked at them, and I looked at the executives were all like, aren't the kids having fun, Mom? And I look at the executives, and I look back, and I look at Don, and he's got the jeans on. He's like one of the people, but I noticed he's wearing some pretty nice shoes, and he's got a really nice, expensive shirt on, and he's like, actually kind of looks like an executive. I'm like, So while the party's going on, I go upstairs, and I walk from like office to office looking at the executives, and you know what? They all had fucking tassels on their very expensive shoes. Even if they were trying to dress down, they were signaling to each other that they could afford fancy, expensive shoes. Then look how I was dressed. I had mismatched gym shoes, one sock, and a Green Lantern shirt. And I'm like, gee, I wonder if this is why they don't take us seriously. Because me and all my friends look like we had just run out of like the 4th grade, camping trip or whatever the hell it was. And it's called the Big Bouncy Star. But that's the internal culture at Disney, which is very rich people treating artists with as little disdain as they can make themselves have. And I don't blame them looking back. That's when I started dressing like a grown-up, and like within 2 years I was running my own movies.
Yeah.
Quick side note, who's your favorite Green Lantern?
Kyle.
You're gonna say Kyle.
I've kind of got a soft. Yeah, I've got a soft spot for him and Wally West.
Okay.
Because after 1985, and it's like and the Green Lantern. I mean, obviously, it's hard not to love Neil Adams' Green Lantern, but they did that whole thing with Paradox, and it was like kind of ballsy, and it's like, wow, Green Lantern's a villain. That's kind of cool. And then they brought in Kyle Rayner, and he was an artist.
Yep.
And that made sense that he was good at being a Green Lantern.
Yeah,
and I always thought, so I always thought it was kind of cool. They made an artist Green Lantern, and then Wally West had to get over all his inferiority complex to become the real Flash after his mentor died. Those are my favorite, I think.
Okay,
cool.
I certainly wish they hadn't brought Barry Allen back and utterly screwed up the DC universe.
Everyone was pissed about Barry Allen.
I mean, but then and then let's rewrite time, and then let's rewrite it again, and then let's do this and let's do that. It's like, it was like, wow. What happened to the editors? Were they all called home and never allowed back in? A weird aside, but I'll take it.
Yeah.
Actually, my favorite Green Lantern, if I have to really, really be favorite, it's probably Alan Scott.
Alan Scott, okay. That's
because I just love the even my favorite Flash is probably Jay Garrick, but just because those comics in the 30s just felt more dangerous, more edgy.
Okay.
I mean, if you read them,
I mean, it was really cutting edge. I mean, like they're definitely, I get that.
Yeah, they're really shit. It wasn't until like the 50s or the late 40s that after World War II they started getting kind of flattened out, and
once they realized they can make a lot of money selling these to kids, they kind of just geared it towards that and toned them.
Yeah, and then we also had the whole thing with the Comics Code, because they were like the House on Un-American Committees was saying that juvenile delinquents were being caused by comic books, and like all the horrible comic books got crushed, and you couldn't have zombies or witches in the comics anymore. So like there was obviously the dark times, but before that, I don't know, Alan Scott, man, he would make himself transparent and walk through the wall and kill you unless you hit him with wood, and the specter would show up and point at you and you go to hell. I don't know, it's kind of cool.